Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the CEO's Field Manual. I'm your host Phil Kerper, Managing Director of Ringling Business Solutions. The title of this episode is How a Hidden Deed Problem Nearly Killed a Multi-million-dollar Deal. This is a fun story to tell that will provide some insights into property sale-leaseback, due diligence, bridging cultures, and most importantly, some hard-earned lessons on managing your key stakeholders in critical moments. So let's jump right in. I was CEO of a private equity sponsored company headquartered in the Deep South. I was hired several years earlier and relocated after spending most of my life living in the northern U.S. I'd been working on, let's say, softening my Yankee ways to the polite manners and pace of the South. The building was a large manufacturing plant with corporate offices in front. It was the largest of 4 U.S. manufacturing plants in our network. As part of the purchase, it was agreed that the previous owner would have permission for his company to occupy one piece of the building where they could manufacture their products, rent-free, as long as we were there. The seller and past owner, who I'll call Bobby, was an elderly Southern gentleman. He would stop by occasionally to visit and stop into the area where his company manufactured. I used Bobby's old office as mine, and each time he would stop in, I'd love to have him come on into my office and visit. I liked Bobby a lot, but also he was a legend at the facility and in the town. He was wealthy, but you'd never know it. His clothes, car, and appearance were casual and plain. His demeanor, that of a friendly Southern gentleman. His eyes, though, were engaging and sharp, and the more I got to know him, the more I understood why he was so respected and so revered. When I first started at the company, I must have looked like a crazy man at the facility. I walked, talked, and moved northern fast. By this time, I learned to slow down, start meetings with some easy small talk, and be more patient overall. You know, being from up north, it's easy to poke fun at the pace of the South. They're onto something here that truly adds quality to relationships and to life. One thing I tried to resist, but struggled with, the Southern accent. It can be, well, contagious. My wife used to give me shine when I'd inadvertently slip into a poorly executed Southern drawl. In my defense, it's hard. You're around this accent all day, and the next thing you know, you all and fixin' are slipping through. Anyway, when Bobby stopped in, we'd have a seat at the small conference table in my office and start by spending 10 or so minutes just chatting. Then if we had any business, it was a gentle conversation and a casual follow-up or resolution. We had developed a great relationship. My private equity sponsor was in Manhattan, and they were anything but Southern. They were very nice guys and extremely sharp, but also fast-talking, aggressive, and sometimes demanding. Owning real estate was not typical for this PE firm, so we had decided to do a sell-leaseback on the building. This also was a way to generate cash for an acquisition we were planning. We found a buyer, negotiated the sale, and were finalizing the details to close the deal. As a side note, there's different philosophies on real estate ownership. On one side, owning real estate is at a minimum a great value creator. In one case, my owner made the real estate assets a business unto itself. The second, which is what this PE firm preferred, was to minimize real estate holdings. When they were included in an acquisition, they often used a sell-leaseback to generate cash to reinvest in the business. You don't own the building, but retain what you need to operate and a long-term lease to occupy. Anyway, back to our story. This was a small town in the South, and the property deed was paper filed at the county courthouse. Our representative got a copy as part of the close package. The deed was a bit goofy, as it was in 2 parts. The first part looked fine. The second page, though, had an issue. It appeared that when the company and plant were purchased, the sale did not include property and what we started to refer to as a donut within the building. This is where Bobby's business was. Yep, we did not actually own the whole building. When I called and informed my active board member in New York, his reaction was, That is not effing possible. Due diligence was done when the building was purchased, and there was, of course, a title insurance policy taken out. I ended up on separate calls with the title insurance company, the attorneys involved, our counsel, the rest of my board. Everyone had the same initial reaction. How did this building get bought and sold multiple times with an undiscovered title problem? What apparently happened is when getting copies of the deed documents, both the title company and the attorneys involved had to go down to the courthouse, retrieve the documents, and make physical copies. As crazy as it sounds, they all missed the page and section with Bobby's donut. We could take action against the title company, but that would be a deal-ending delay. So I was tasked with seeing if Bobby would sell us the donut section on reasonable terms. I called Bobby and asked him to stop by for a visit. It was a Wednesday, and he said he'd be over Friday morning, which was his typical cadence for a visit. I said that would be just fine. I happened to have a call with my board member, and he was already exercised that I did not insist Bobby come over immediately. On Friday, Bobby stopped by. We sat at the table, spent several minutes talking fishing, cars, how the family was doing. And then I briefly told him about our sell-leaseback plans and that we had found he owned the donut area in the middle of the plant. I said, we'd like to do this deal. Would you consider selling it? He said he would think about it, and I said that would be appreciated, and we parted. My owner called a few hours later and asked how it went. I told him, and he asked what's the deadline for him to come back to us. I said none. He didn't like that much either. I said, look, draw up the agreement, leave the financial terms blank, and trust me to do my thing. Bobby will agree to a reasonable deal, but pressing a Southern gentleman is not the way to make it happen. Mr. Bobby swung by the next Friday, and after the usual socializing, I asked him if he had considered the sale of his donut. He said he had and could not see any reason to sell. He did not need the cash. If we ever left, he'd have leverage on the next owner to keep his manufacturing place. We had reached our first moment of truth. I was prepared for this contingency, and I said, hey, Bob, humor me. Hypothetically, if you were to sell, what would the terms be? I showed him the draft agreement and asked to have his attorney look it over and told him to feel free to send me the bill. And let's at least have a draft deal just in case you change your mind. He paused and said, sounds fine. Again, I asked for no promises or timelines, even though I knew my board member would not be thrilled. The next Friday, Bobby stopped by. He did not raise the issue, and neither did I. The following Friday, he stopped by and handed me a draft proposal that would be acceptable for him. It was not going to work, but we were now at the table. The next week, I gave him a counter. No discussion, just please take a look. But now, we were out of time. My PE owners were beside themselves, and the sell-leaseback deal was getting shaky because of the delay. But he had the cards, and of course, he knew it. He had no real incentive to budge, and we were getting desperate. My PE board member basically said, get his signature on this, or it's going to turn into a mess, but we're going to get this deal done. That Friday, Mr. Bobby stopped by. I asked him if he had looked over the documents. He said he had, and his attorney had. I asked, will you sign them? He repeated his concerns. Our second moment of truth. I said, Bobby, this is a fair deal for both of us, and I need to close this sell-leaseback for the success of the company. I'm asking you to agree. It's a good and fair deal, and I'm asking you to sign it. He hesitated and then said, okay, Phil, and signed the agreement. When I told my board member, who I also have an amazing relationship, that Bobby signed, he said, it's about damn time. I said, you're welcome. Some takeaways and lessons. First, invest in relationships and trust. I liked the folks I was engaging with, but also worked hard to be a good partner and associate. You never know who at some point is going to be sitting on the other side of the table. Build, don't burn. Second, work on understanding your stakeholders. This is a case where the two parties were headed for disaster. I was in a unique position to bridge a large gap. To do so, I had to understand what both wanted, but more importantly, how both thought and would approach a solution. I also had a fiduciary responsibility to my PE owners. I had to navigate the negotiations with Bobby while staying aligned with the loyalty to the firm. Third, the details of every deal not only matter, but can be huge. It's hard to imagine multiple title firms and attorneys missing a major issue in a land deal, but it happened. Sweat the details is a buzz term, but it can have teeth. And finally, when you have the ball, do it your way and own it. This is a case where no one was going to give me the answer. I had to decide my approach and my plan. Sometimes it's just you and it's lonely as the CEO. My encouragement is to own the moment and do it your way. At least then, if you fail on your terms. Thanks for joining this episode of the CEO's Field Manual. We'll see you soon. Thanks everybody. Please subscribe and we'll see you at a future video.
Tune into the next episode of the CEO's Field Manual. It's thrilling.